Oswald D. Productions, Neapolis Media Group, and Loose Moose Productions. This is the Lone Gunman Podcast, featuring your host, Rob Clark, where research comes to shine and myths come to die. Stay tuned. Be right there. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. This is Rob Clark, and this is episode 188 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. Thanks for coming back and spending some more time with your boy. We've been in New Orleans for the past couple shows, and we're going to be there just a little bit longer. You can't ever look at New Orleans and what was going on there in the summer of '63 too much, because I believe this is where the wheels were set into motion for Dallas. So this episode is called the Garrison Files, and we're going to do some deep dumpster diving into some of Jim Garrison's most talked about and least known, what I believe to be important files and interviews with some of the people that were around in New Orleans in 1963, and some even before that. So let's take a look, folks, at our first document here. This is what looks to be like an FBI cablegram. It states this: Orvie O'Quinn, a cameraman for Channel 12, who is a neighbor of the informant, who swore informant to secrecy before furnishing the information. The informant advised that, according to O'Quinn, he had talked to the judge who had handled the matter involving Clay Shaw, and this judge stated that after he had seen the evidence District Attorney Garrison has, he strongly believes that if the case against Clay Shaw goes to a jury, the jury will vote at least 11-1 in favor of a conviction. According to O'Quinn, Garrison's ace in the hole is well-documented proof consisting of a certified photostatic copy of a job application made by Lee Harvey Oswald in his own handwriting during the spring or summer of '63 with a trucking company, name not mentioned, believed to be in New Orleans, in which Oswald listed 3 personal references, one of whom was Jack Ruby. O'Quinn also mentioned that attorney Sam Monk Zeldin has knowledge of this application, as he is an attorney for this trucking firm. Bureau will be kept advised of any pertinent developments. Now, we know Sam Monk Zeldin from being basically a mentor to attorney Dean Andrews. And he was the fellow that Dean Andrews first called when he was allegedly approached via phone to represent Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas after his arrest. So that's interesting. And although it would be something, like really, really something, if we had a copy of this document, but I have looked and looked and looked, and I've seen it stated in numerous places among this FBI telegram, but I have never actually seen the document that Garrison stated that he had. I would like to see it for sure, because that would be uh, certainly something. Next up, from the Garrison Files, March 6, 1967, a memorandum to Jim Garrison from James Alcock, Assistant DA. On March the 2nd, 1967, Clyde Dimbro came into the office and told me that he had worked for Jack Ruby between the years of 61 and 63 at Ruby's 3 clubs in Dallas, Texas. He recalls seeing Lee Harvey Oswald in Jack Ruby's offices on 3 different occasions. Now, of course, this could have been confused with Larry Crayford. Also, he recalls that Officer Tippett, who he knew as Tippy or Tip, was Ruby's bodyguard / boyfriend. This man's appearance was very shabby, and in some respects his story was not believable. He presently is a singer at the Alibi Club in Metairie, Louisiana. His agent here in town is Mrs. Melba Wolfe. Wolfe said she has in a scrapbook all that has ever been written about the assassination. Mr. Limbo also said that he had seen Ruby in the hospital 2 days before his death. This man was written up in a local newspaper column sometime last week. This column is called C'est le Vivre by Lorraine Guerreau, spelling unsure. Well, that's interesting. So like I said, seeing, quote, Oswald in Jack Ruby's offices on 3 different occasions. Like I said, he could have been confusing him for Larry Crayford. But interesting that he recalls Officer Tippett, who he knew as Tippy or Tip, was Ruby's bodyguard / boyfriend. That's interesting. Next up, let's take a look at young David Lewis Jr., a white male, 26 years old, New Orleans, Louisiana. Statement to the District Attorney, Parish of Orleans, State of Louisiana, on December the 15th, 1966. So this is very early in the Garrison investigation. He states, I have never been previously interviewed by the FBI or any other agency on this matter. During the months of 1961 through January 62, I was employed by Guy Bannister and Associates as a private investigator. In the late summer of 63, I was reporting to the Louisiana State Employment Office at 601 Camp Street, seeking steady employment. At this time, all I had was odd jobs from time to time. Several times I stopped by Guy Bannister's office in the Newman building to see if he had any legwork to be done. On one occasion, I stopped by Bannister's office. Before going into the office, I stopped by Mancuso's restaurant, which is on the corner of Bannister's office. Same building. I noticed Sergio Arcacha, Carlos, and a fellow whom I was introduced to by Carlos as Lee Harvey in the restaurant. It has now been determined by me through photographs that this man was Lee Harvey Oswald. The time when I was at home, when Jack Ruby killed Lee Oswald and it came on TV, and I said I had seen that man before. When I first seen Lee Oswald in the restaurant, he didn't talk much, but he seemed to be anxious about getting on his way. Oswald appeared to be a highly nervous man with boundless energy. Carlos, Sergio, and Lee were involved in some business which dealt with Cuba. It appeared to me that this was a business that was more or less a racket to require funds. Interesting. Um, shit. He goes on to state, Carlos, whose last name he doesn't know, was a well-dressed man, black hair, black eyes, approximately 5'11" to 6 feet tall, very neat. Would be assumed he was a businessman. His approximate age would be late 20s or early 30s. He was wearing a light blue suit, either black or dark blue, mustache, clean shaved, and had an accent, but was not pronounced as Arkash's accent. He appeared to be highly educated and might be considered as a high-class Spaniard, as was Arkacha. Arkacha Smith was dressed in a sport coat, white shirt and tie, very neat, short and stocky, black hair, dark complexion, talked with a very thick accent. Arkacha Smith, to me, appeared to be the boss. I had only seen Oswald about 3 or 4 times in the neighborhood of Lafayette and Camp Streets in the Newman building. A few days either before or after Mancuso's, I went into Bannister's office. I went in, they shut the door to the inner office as if highly confidential. And in Bannister's office was Guy Bannister, David Ferry, Arkacha, and a slim, sandy-haired young man. This man could have very well been Oswald. By the way, Louise Decker happened to be in the office at this time. That was Guy Bannister's secretary, or one of them. Another time I remember seeing Carlos, Arkacha Smith, and David Ferry walking from Mancuso's restaurant toward Bannister's office. Now, if this is true, it's very interesting that Oswald would have been in cahoots or in some kind of a business type deal or talking business with Carlos Quiroga, who I'm sure this is the Carlos, and Sergio Arcacha Smith, who was the de facto leader of the New Orleans chapter of the DRE at the time. Well, not at the time that Oswald was there, but shortly before that. So, very interesting, because Carlos Quiroga, of course, was buddies with Carlos Bernier and basically offered himself to do, or to take it upon himself to do, quote, undercover work and actually go to Oswald's house or apartment on Magazine Street, the address on the flyers, and try to get some more info from this guy, or so he says. But if he was really working with Oswald, and I've got the feeling that the whole Canal Street fracas with Bernier and Celso Hernandez and Miguel Cruz was a staged incident, and that a lot of these guys know more than what they're saying. Very interesting. So, they let David Lewis tell his story, but they also had some questions for him. And these questions come from Lou Ivon to David Lewis. The first one, approximately, how many times have you seen Lee Harvey, who you later identified as Lee Harvey Oswald? He says, no more than 4 times, each time in the company of Carlos. So every time that David Lewis saw Lee Harvey Oswald, he was with Carlos Quiroga. The day that you first met him, were you introduced to him? Yes. Did you hold a conversation? No, more or less, it was, I'm glad to meet you. Did you hear any of their conversation? No, however, Carlos did have quite a few dealings with Bannister. What they were, I don't know. Always closed door stuff. This other gentleman, who appeared to be the manager or boss of the organization, which Lee Harvey Oswald and Carlos were involved in, also had dealings with Mr. Bannister. But it was also unknown to me the nature of that business. At that time I was in and out of the offices quite frequently, So Mr. Bannister could have had some direct dealings with Oswald that I do not know about. Did you know a David Ferry? I did know David Ferry. I'm going to show you a photograph of David Ferry. Is this the same one you know? It is, without a shadow of a doubt. I do know that he also had dealings with Mr. Bannister, but I was not informed of these dealings. I'm going to show you another photograph. Do you know this man? This man is Lee Harvey Oswald, the man I knew as Lee Harvey when I first met him in Mancuso's. How do you know David Ferry, and where did you meet him? I met David Ferry in Bannister's office through Mr. Bannister, and on one occasion with Mr. Jack Martin and Mr. Joseph Newborough and Louise Decker when we went to Mr. Ferry's home in Metairie, Louisiana. What was the nature of your business with David Ferry? The nature of my business was I was just along for the ride. It was Mr. Martin and Mr. Newborough's business. I had taken a ride on a free afternoon. It had something to do with Eastern Airlines, something to do with a license. Did you know the type of business that David Ferry was in? At that particular time, no, I did not. I had seen Mr. Ferry in Bannister's office on several occasions after this, but the nature of their business was also unknown to me. My primary business was as a leg man for Mr. Bannister. Have you ever seen Lee Harvey Oswald and David Ferry together? Not to my knowledge, no. They may have been, but I don't know. That is one thing that is really bugging me because I knew both Lee Harvey Oswald and David Ferry around the same time. Wait, David Ferry, Carlos was that other man. Lee Harvey Oswald, was it? There was another man there. It may have been. I am not sure because I remember this particular day. I came in, and as soon as I came into the office, I looked into Mr. Bannister's office. David Ferry, Mr. Bannister, was at his desk, and this other gentleman back and to the left of David Ferry was there, and that may have been Oswald. Carlos was sitting in another chair in the office, and that part's kind of faded out on the copy that I have there. Damn it. No longer vacant. They closed the door. I cannot honestly state that the man to the left of David Ferry was Lee Harvey Oswald. Even though it may have been, they were talking about something. I'm trying to think what few words I did hear in relation to it. Now I'm going to get off this and get on to David Ferry. His business with Mr. Bannister seemed to involve some string pulling involving the licensing of David Ferry. How many times were you in Ferry's apartment? I have only been to his home once. Were you over by his apartment on that occasion? Who was there? Two young men were at David Ferry's house when we arrived. One looked like Lee Oswald. He had sandy hair or blondish colored hair, wearing sport clothing. The other fellow, I don't know. He had black hair, stocky build, but a darker complexion. You keep mentioning this name Carlos. Does the name Carlos Quiroga mean anything to you? It does sound familiar. It may be the same man I am speaking of. I will state this much, that if I saw Carlos today, I could definitely identify him. He would be the man that introduced you to Lee Harvey Oswald. That is correct beyond a shadow of a doubt, David Lewis says. Right now, we're going to cut off this interview. Is everything in this statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge? That is correct. You are making this statement freely and voluntarily. I am more than glad to give this statement. Since this meeting with Lee Harvey Oswald back in 1963, has anybody interviewed you, talked to you? No. Then I gather that this is the first time anybody has interviewed you to your knowledge of Lee Harvey Oswald. That is correct. Is there any doubt in your mind that this Lee Harvey Oswald is the same man I showed you in the photograph earlier who you now say is Lee Harvey Oswald? No doubt whatsoever. That is the same man I met. After leaving Bannister's employment, where did you work? Well, I was married April 4th of 62. My son was born January 21st, 63. First, I worked at Gulf Oil Company in Houston. Returned to New Orleans in May of 62. Then worked at Floor and Wall Distributors on Edinburgh Street, August through September 62. Zales Jewelers on Canal Street, watch repair, September 62 through March 63. Odd jobs from April to March 64, and reported to Louisiana Employment Office. Mike Persia, March 64, Parts Department and truck driver, left in 65. Trailways, Continental Trailways freight agent, from April the 4th of 65 to the present. And that is signed David F. Lewis Jr., folks. So, wow. Very interesting stuff from him about Carlos Quiroga and Lee Oswald and Sergio Arcacha and Guy Bannister. Sounds certainly like they were up to something. Question is what? Let's move on to a interview by Stephen Burton of Lawrence Howard. That's right, prime suspect. Lawrence Howard was interviewed by the chairman of the Citizens Committee of Inquiry from Los Angeles, California, apparently on behalf of the Garrison investigation. And this interview took place on January the 25th, 1968, in El Monte, California, at Lawrence Howard's home. I did not identify myself as anything other than a reporter who is assigned full-time to the assassination controversy. Because of the role I was playing, and also because Howard sat with a German Luger in his hand throughout the entire interview, I did not feel inclined to get into information not available to a sharp reporter, except in the most indirect of ways. Howard vehemently denied any knowledge whatsoever of the Sylvia Odio incident. He confirmed everything in the FBI reports of interviews with him regarding his visits to Dallas. Miami FBI report of September the 26th, 64. The Harry Whidbey FBI report, Los Angeles, September 25th, 64. The Whidbey report of September the 23rd, 64. And the Miami FBI report of October the 2nd, 64. Howard said that he was on No Name Key with Jerry Patrick and later became the commander of the training camp there in August of 63. He admitted meeting Lester Logue in Dallas on one occasion. He showed me employment records which show that he was working in Los Angeles on November 22nd, 1963. And folks, we've talked about this on previous shows. Those employment records are horseshit. Of particular note, a passing reference to No Name Key, he said that I was the second person to bring that up. The other person being someone in Louisiana who moved from the state when the investigation became public. I told him that you had mentioned No Name Key in one of your interviews, although I am not certain this is true. And the person he was talking about, the first person that he had talked about bringing up No Name Key was Roy Hargraves. During this interview, Howard provided information on Robert K. Brown, Steve Wilson, Dennis Harbor, Ed Collins, Alexander Rourke, Clint Wheat, Lauren Eugene Hall, Edgar Eugene Bradley, Leslie Bradley, Guy Gabaldon, Wally Boots Welsh, Howard Davis, and Jerry Patrick Hemming. Most notable were his revelations that, number one, he met Bradley once, and Rourke, Hemming, and Howard Davis were in Mexico around the same time that Lee Harvey Oswald was. Well, that's interesting. He said, I have established a good friendly relationship with Howard. He said explicitly that he has taken a liking to me and has given me information that he has given to no one else. Again, he reiterated that he knows of many more people involved in anti-Castro activities whose names he will not bring up first, but if I bring them up, he will tell me what he knows. Sounds like Jerry Hemming there. Howard also reiterated that he would like very much to help in this investigation and is anxious to go to New Orleans soon to speak with Jim Garrison. I showed Howard blow-ups out of context of the Cuban-looking man who was arrested in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. He said that the man looked very familiar, although he could not place him. I gave him copies of the prints, which he will show to friends, presumably Jerry Hemming and Guy Gabaldon, to try and identify the man. I did not tell him what the context was, and you should know that one of our members has located this Cuban in the crowd in the Alchins photo, and he appears to be holding a two-way radio to his mouth. So, this guy showed Lawrence Howard pictures of the dark-complected man, but he told Howard that the man was arrested in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, which, if true, is certainly a revelation of which we have absolutely no record of whatsoever. I mean, out of all the people that were in Dealey Plaza on November the 22nd, 1963, we've pretty much identified everybody except for dark-complected man. And this guy is, well, Howard's being a little evasive. And of course, you know, he told the guy, if you come up with some names, he's not going to tell you names, but if you come up with the names, he'll tell you everything. Which I think is just more than a little bit revealing. In interview number 2, Howard mentioned a pilot named Molina who flew several people to New York. He said that this was not Joe Molina, who, from the Texas School Book Depository, is a different Molina. He also said that Francisco Molina, a person mentioned in Cuba as being pro-Castro, was not the Molina he was referring to. He then remembered that this pilot was Enrique Molina. Hemming's letter to Dick from February the 3rd of 63 identifies Molina as Enrique Molina Riviera of FAR. I then showed Howard the attached FBI report on Robert K. Brown, that Special Agent Charles Rose of Columbus, Georgia, from December the 4th, 63, and asked him about Brown. He produced the attached article by Brown on anti-Castro raiders and told me that he had known Brown. He said that Brown had visited him recently and was currently attached to U.S. Special Forces. Yeah. Some years ago, Doug and I kind of cracked one of the confidential informant tags that the FBI was using, and one of their informants was Robert K. Brown, a guy really, really close to these gunboat cowboys and anti-Castro fellows. So that's interesting. Of more interest to Howard was the reference to Steve Wilson in the aforementioned FBI report. He said that Wilson was never a writer of any kind. He said that Wilson was with Howard in Los Angeles in 63 and attended several right-wing meetings with Howard to raise supplies for the raids. Howard said that Wilson returned to Miami by way of Denver, Colorado. Howard thought it possibly significant that one Dennis Harbor, who translated a book on guerrilla warfare for Robert K. Brown, was a homosexual. He said that Harbor had lived with Ed Collins, a skin diver, who drowned under mysterious circumstances for quite a while. Howard said that Howard K. Davis, a close friend of Jerry Patrick Hemmings, had been Raul Castro's personal pilot at one time. He said that Davis's background was similar to Hemmings, and that Davis flew Hemming, Wilson, and others to Guatemala in October of '63. They were ostensibly searching for Alexander Rourke. Howard then disclosed, after requesting that the tape recorder be stopped, that Rourke, Hemming, Wilson, and or Davis were in Mexico at the same time someone else was. It was obvious while questioning him further that he was referring to Oswald's trip in late September '63, although he was uncertain of the time. He further said that Rourke's plane crashed in Mexico in '63 and identified Rourke as a freelance writer with both Castro ties and anti-Castro ties. In a confidential letter I have from Hemming to Dick, dated February the 3rd, Hemming identifies Rourke as a phony. I presume that you have a copy of this letter in your files. Howard identified the owner of a house on Lafayette Terrace in Los Angeles where paramilitary organizations held meetings and prepared ammunition as one Clint Wheat's residence. After requesting the tape be stopped again, Howard said that he once met Gene Bradley at this house on Lafayette Terrace. He says that subjectively, Bradley struck him as a man who believed in action. On tape, I did get him to say, I think I'll just say this much, that Mr. Bradley is, my personal opinion of him is, that he was a doer instead of a talker. That's all I'll say. I'm in no way implying anything. He just struck me as a man that could handle himself in any situation. I could be way off base, but this is just the impression that I got. Tell me if you want me to turn it off. Did he strike you as being in any way violent or aggressive? Because his press relations are a marvel. He strikes everyone as a real quiet guy. Yes, with his character and all, but underneath I would say that I could detect that he was a very capable, aggressive, and competent man, if you know what I'm saying. I don't know. What are you saying, Howard? In further conversation, Howard stated that he had recently talked with a man, quote, Jerry Patrick, who was in jail with Leslie Bradley in Cuba in 1961. But the Jerry Patrick was a guess, but I believe it was Lauren Hall. This man did not indicate that Leslie Bradley looked like Gene Bradley, but Howard will check on this. I gave him a photo of Gene Bradley to help with the identification. Howard also remembered a Wally Boots Welch who ran an employment agency in Dallas. That is Lauren Hall's buddy in Dallas. He said that Hall had gone there to see him when they were in Dallas together. Howard stated that he first met Guy Gabaldon in 1961, and Gabaldon ran an anti-Castro office in Los Angeles and headed the Drive Against Communist Aggression, otherwise known as DACA. Howard said that he was a very close friend of Gabaldon's and doubted that Gabaldon could possibly be involved in this at all. Howard said that Lauren Eugene Hall was Gabaldon's campaign manager when Gabaldon ran for Congress in 1964. Well, that's a weird fact. Analysis. I am still not certain that Howard is telling what he tells straight, but I tend to think he is. He has given me too much information, including the enclosed memo from Jerry Patrick to Miguel Fuentes, president of Guatemala in December of '62, which contains background info on Hemming and Robert K. Brown, photos of the instructors at No Name Key, and samples of his and Seymour's handwriting for me to reject him out of hand. Sincerely, Steve Barton, February 19th, 1968. Wild. So, Howard said quite a bit in that interview that I've never heard from him before. Um, and if true, very interesting, folks. Very, very interesting. Next up, let's see here. From April the 13th, 1967. From Andrew Mumu Shambra, Assistant DA to Jim Garrison. Interview with Miguel Cruz, 1967. Who the hell is Miguel Cruz, you might ask? Well, he was involved, one of three Cubans involved in the Canal Street fracas with Oswald. So let's see what Mumu has to tell us from this interview of March 19th, 1967. I traveled to Baton Rouge, Louisiana to talk to Miguel Cruz, who informed me that he was present when Carlos Bernier and Oswald had the fight on Canal Street in front of the Maison Blanche building. Miguel's address in Baton Rouge is 505 East Stadium Street on the LSU campus. Miguel Cruz is from Camagüey, Cuba, and he came to know this country on December the 5th, 1962. He says that he does not know Carlos Quiroga, Alberto Fowler, or Ricardo Davis. He said that he had done some work for Alpha 66, whose leader is Eloy Gutierrez Minoya, who was subsequently captured by Castro and may be a prisoner in Cuba at the present time. Cruz said that the first time he saw Oswald was when Oswald and Bernier had the fight on Canal Street, that he was in Bernier's store when he was informed by Celso Hernandez that Oswald was distributing leaflets in front of the Maison Blanche building. Cruz said that 2 days before this, Oswald had come into Bernier's store and offered to help him train Cubans for the invasion of Cuba. Oswald showed Bernier a Marine training manual that he had, and Oswald told Bernier that this manual told how to train people for warfare. Cruz said that he and Bernier and Hernandez left the store and immediately went to Canal Street, where Bernier and Oswald exchanged a few words and had the fight. Cruz said that he was arrested along with Oswald and Bernier and sat next to Oswald in the police car on the way to the district. He said that Oswald never said a word, either in the police car or in the district. The next time Cruz saw Oswald was when they had to go to court. He believes it was the following day. Cruz said at this time Oswald did not say anything to anybody and went and sat down in the colored section of the courtroom with some colored prisoners. Cruz said that he had never seen Oswald with any strong-looking Latin American type individuals, but he could remember a strong-looking Latin American type person, around 25 or 30, who was a little taller than Oswald and weighed close to 200 pounds, standing in front of the Maison Blanche building with a camera and taking pictures of Oswald and other people when Oswald was distributing leaflets there. He asked a few people where they were from and seemed interested in what was going on. He was dressed in a suit and tie and wore dark glasses. Now, this is interesting because this certainly sounds like it could have been Sergio Acacia Smith or Carlos Quiroga for that matter. So if they were filming Oswald leafleting pro-Castro literature, what the hell was going on? They obviously wanted to document it for some reason. So that's a very interesting revelation. And just a quick side note here from February 25th, 1967. And this is a Bureau Airtel to headquarters advised this date that Ora Lee, last name withheld, Clay Shaw's former secretary to International Trade Mart in New Orleans, who is employed by the Heart Fund at Ochsner Clinic, stated in front of Dr. Charles B. Moore and others at the Ochsner Hospital after Shaw's press conference where he advised he had never met David Ferry, that she had seen Ferry go into Shaw's office in the International Trade Mart building on a number of occasions and believed Ferry had privileged entry into Shaw's office. Um, so yeah, that's interesting. That's Clay Shaw's secretary, people. Now, back to the interview of Miguel Cruz. Um, or he states, he did not know Andrew Blackman. He could not identify any of the people in the picture of Oswald distributing leaflets in front of the Trade Mart. I showed him a picture and he identified Bernier, Claudio Cruz, and himself as being in the picture. He did not know David Ferry. Cruz said that he knows Emilio Santana, and he can remember that Santana was driving a big, almost new car, that Santana told him that he was making money working for the CIA, taking people out of Cuba. Cruz said that Santana came to his house one time and wanted him to give him a letter and some papers that would signify that he, Santana, was a member of Alpha 66. Santana said that this would help him collect some money for the group. Cruz said that after Santana got the letter and some papers, he never returned to his house. Cruz said that Santana used to hang around the Florida Avenue projects by the B&C supermarket where there used to be a lot of Cubans. Cruz said that most of these Cubans have moved to the St. Thomas projects. Cruz stated that he knows Arcasha by name only, that he does not know Gloria Ford, Dave Ferry, Clay Shaw, Clay Bertrand, Dr. Guittard, or anything about the Cuban training camps across the lake. So, very interesting stuff from Miguel Cruz. Now, speaking of Miguel Cruz, let's talk about his buddy, Celso Hernandez, who was also part of the Canal Street fracas. And this is an interview of John Volz, or from John Volz, to Jim Garrison on March the 1st, 1967. I had occasion to interview Mr. Charles Noto, an ex-levee board police officer. He told me that he remembers arresting Lee Harvey Oswald in October or November of 1961 on Breakwater Road, the point on the lakefront in New Orleans. He made the arrest after noticing Oswald and another white male whom he identifies as Celso Hernandez from our photographs together in a white panel truck at a late hour. He recalls the truck belonged to an electronics firm, but cannot recall the name. At the time of the arrest, Oswald became very belligerent and went into a spiel about Gestapo tactics and identified himself as being with Fair Play for Cuba. He demanded to see the officer in charge. Both Oswald and Hernandez were brought to Levee Board Police Headquarters on the lakefront, where after a closed-door session with Marcel Champon, the officer in charge, he, Champon, told Noto to release both men. Hernandez had previously told the officers that he was employed by an electronics firm on Broad Street and that the truck, a Chevy or Dodge, belonged to it. Noto further recalled that in October or November of '62, he, Noto, helped immigration officers surround a house in Lakeview on Spanish Fort Boulevard. Noto said that according to federal agents, they were looking for Cuban refugees, and he thinks that the agents told him that Ferry was supposed to fly them to Cuba. The only person in the house was a Spanish woman. Also present at the time were Patrolman Albert Mancuso and Superintendent Joseph Cronin. Present in the station at the time of the Oswald and Hernandez were brought in were Patrolman Albert Mancuso, Jack Gleber, and David Lousteau. Eldred Mackey was Noto's partner who participated in the arrest. What? The what? So, pretty sure Oswald was supposed to be in Russia in 1961. Of course, this could have been just a typo or a misremembering of the date, and actually could have been 62. So, if he's supposed to be fighting Celso Hernandez and Carlos Brier in 1963, but he's hanging out at the lakefront with Celso Hernandez in 1962 or 61 in a company truck that Hernandez worked for, what in the hell were these guys up to? And they were arrested and let go after a closed-door meeting? That's very interesting. What the hell was going on? Oh boy. Next up, folks, November 1967, Dallas, Texas. From Jim Alcock and Louis Ivon, Chief Investigator. Referencing Earl Wallace Edwards. Okay, Lou Ivon and I interviewed Earl Edwards at his residence in Jackson, Mississippi. The interview, blah, blah, blah. Earl Edwards is presently a parole violator from Arkansas. He was convicted in the state for issuing a number of worthless checks and sentenced to 5 years in state pen. He contended this was his only felony conviction, however, admitted he had done some other misdemeanor convictions, or had some other misdemeanor convictions. Edwards stated he, using the name David Lawrence, operated the South Cliff Motel in Dallas, Texas for about 1 year in 1963. He could not recall specifically when he first began operating the motel, however, he feels that it was sometime near the beginning of September 63. He stated that the motel was located at 4515 South Lancaster Street in Dallas, Texas, and that the phone number at that time was FR48105. He also stated that he and his wife operated the South Cliff Cafe, which was located directly in front of the South Cliff Motel. Edwards stated that Lee Harvey Oswald, in early of October 63, checked into his motel, in parentheses, under an assumed name on 3 separate occasions. The first occasion was, as he recalls, about 6 or 7 weeks prior to the date of Kennedy's assassination. On the date he checked in, Oswald was alone, and he was given unit number 5. He was given this unit because he had requested one where his car could be parked out of view, and he seemed to know that unit 5 provided such a parking location. From this request, Edwards assumed that Oswald had been at the motel on some prior occasion. Edwards cannot remember the alias used by Oswald on this occasion. Oswald had arrived at the motel in an old but clean, off-white 1955 or 56 automobile. The automobile was the type with the retractable metal roof, which, when not up, was stored in the trunk section of the automobile. The automobile bore Texas plates and was driven by Oswald. Edwards recalls that the day was Friday and that Oswald checked in about noon and paid $4.50 for a night's lodging in unit number 5. Oswald did not leave the room after checking in, and about noon on Saturday, Edwards went to Oswald's room and woke him up. At this time, Oswald gave Edwards another $4.50 for Saturday night. The room was not messed up, nor did it have any bottles, which would indicate that Oswald had been doing any drinking. At the time when Oswald checked in on Friday, he was wearing a burnt orange colored t-shirt and work pants, and with the exception of the brief conversation between Edwards and Oswald at noon, Oswald said nothing to Edwards, nor did he at any time to Edwards' knowledge leave the room. Oswald left the room sometime on Sunday morning. About 2 weeks later, on a Saturday, Oswald checked into the motel and was given unit number 12. On this occasion, Oswald was not driving an automobile, and Edwards assumed that he had either come in a cab or had been visiting someone in the VA hospital across the street and had walked over to the motel from there. Oswald checked in on this occasion sometime in the afternoon at about 10 p.m. that night a young white female, asked what unit Mr. Logan was in. As Edwards recalls, Oswald had used the alias of Mel Logan when he checked into the motel. The female had very pretty eyes, light blue, and was 5'3" or 5'4" tall, and weighed about 110 pounds. She was wearing a blue satin dress, and Edwards stated that she had a very strong German accent, and he felt sure that she had just come from the VA hospital across the street. Edwards feels that this white female was Marina Oswald. Edwards did not see her again after he directed her to Unit 12. Oswald left the motel the next morning about 10 a.m., and he was by himself at this time. Now, just a sidebar here, folks. Of course, an uneducated felon might mistake Marina's Russian accent for German if he really didn't know better. And of course, this could have happened. But one small detail that Mr. Edwards leaves out here is that Marina would have been very pregnant at this time. So, you'd think that would stand out in your mind a little bit, unless she was wearing some kind of a jacket to kind of hide the fact that she was pregnant, which, is possible. But just keep that in mind. About 2 weeks prior to the assassination now, Oswald checked into the motel at about 5 a.m. He arrived at the motel in a cab, and it appeared to Edwards that he had been drinking. He was unshaven at this time, and he was rented unit number 11 this time. At about 4 p.m. that same day, a white male visited Oswald in his room. This white male was about 35 years old, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, well-dressed with a pinstripe suit and alligator shoes. He had an olive complexion and black hair. He arrived at the motel in a Chevy automobile. About 11:30 that night, a roomer in the motel complained to Edwards about a disturbance in Unit 11. Edwards went to the unit to quiet the situation down, but upon approaching, decided it best to call the police. This is the only occasion that Edwards ever personally called the police to the motel, which is why it stands out in his mind. He suggested if the records were still in existence at the police department, they could be used to pinpoint the exact date of the occurrence and when Lee Oswald was staying there. When the police arrived, they went to Unit 11 and advised all there that they would either quiet down or go to jail. At this time, Edwards saw Oswald and the white male who had come to the hotel at 4 p.m., along with 3 other white males in the motel room. He could not give a description of the 3 white males who were in the room with Oswald and the white male he had directed to Oswald's room at 4 p.m. When the police left, all the persons present in Unit 11, including Oswald, left in the Chevy automobile. There were quite a few liquor bottles scattered about the room. Edwards recalls that sometime near the 1st of October of '63, Jack Ruby checked into his motel in the morning hours and was given unit number 1. Ruby did not use his real name, and Edwards cannot recall the one he used on that occasion. Ruby had arrived in a convertible automobile, but Edwards could not give us any further description of the car. Shortly after Ruby checked in, Oswald visited him in his room for a short time. Oswald and Ruby went to a drive-in restaurant located next door to the motel on Lancaster Street. They spent about 2 hours talking in the restaurant. Edwards cannot recall the name of the restaurant. However, he states that it was a drive-in restaurant and was right next door to the motel, so its name should be easily obtainable. When Oswald and Ruby returned to the motel, they did not re-enter the room, but rather drove off in Ruby's car. Edwards stated that he had seen Ruby on another occasion in a lounge by the name of either the Melody Lounge or the Singing Lounge or Bar. On this occasion, Oswald was sitting at the bar drinking beer when Ruby entered. After entering, Ruby used the telephone and collected some money from behind the bar. On his way out of the bar, Ruby stopped and talked to Oswald for about 3 minutes. This bar was a notorious hangout for homosexuals. So what are you doing in there, Mr. Edwards? Creeping? During the course of our interview with Edwards, he attempted to call the South Cliff Motel, but was informed by the Dallas operator that there was no listing for that name. Also, Edwards attempted to locate by long-distance telephone Ken Boyer, owner of the South Cliff Motel, at the time Edwards was running it. However, the Dallas operator informed him there was no listing in Dallas for Ken Boyer. So, was this all a bunch of horse shit made up? Probably. This guy seems a little off his nut, a little off his rocker, but he was giving a lot of very specific information, and I would like to know if it was ever followed up on. Let's see. Next up, the boys were busy in '67, boy, let me tell you. From Frank Meloch, or Melich, to Jim Garrison, March 11, '67. Information received by telephone from Charles Burns of St. Louis, Missouri. He says, look, this is kind of a long story, but I was on the job working for Texas Estimates on the day of the assassination of John Kennedy, about 30 minutes before it happened, and I was walking between two buildings about a half a block off Lemon Avenue, which was on the motorcade route. I was crossing the street, and I stepped out in the street, and I was hit by this gal in a Cadillac. Louisiana license number 941985, and her name was Jeanette Conforto. She was in Dallas on that day. She was employed by the Carousel Club and Jack Ruby. She made the statement to the company security people since they were on the accident job, and they questioned her. She was in a hurry to get to New Orleans right away, and she made the statement. They asked if they could get a hold of her on the job at the Carousel Club, and she said no. The nightclub would not be open that night. That's a Friday night, mind you, and that sounds kind of unusual. As it turned out, it wasn't open, but it was because of the assassination. And she had this fellow that was with her. I couldn't remember his name. It wasn't on the accident report. They carried me over to a clinic to be x-rayed, and it all happened while I was in the clinic. They were actually with me at the clinic when it happened. It came over the radio, and he told me a long line of stuff that turned out not to be true. I don't know. I just thought you people might be interested in getting some of this information. This information, I understand, was given to the FBI by the company's security chief, but nothing ever came out of it, like in the Warren report or anything. Did she seem nervous or upset? She was almost hysterical. You think for the fact of hitting you? I don't know. She was cussing me for doing this. She went into a side building and used the telephone to call this guy, and he was there in like 2 minutes. He was somewhere close in another Cadillac. You don't know who this fellow was? I don't know, but this security chief does know because he got his name and everything. But it was never entered on the accident report because he wasn't actually involved. He said he lived right down the street in some apartment building, and they checked on that, and he didn't live there. He, this quote security chief, was working for Texas Estimates during this time, but now he's retired and lives in Dallas. The security office for Texas Estimates in Dallas has his accident report and has this information on file, and they have the statement he made on file documented before the assassination. It all seems kind of fishy to me. I'm calling from St. Louis. I'm still working for Texas Estimates, but I'm up here on field service for McDonald Aircraft. The number is blah, blah, blah in St. Louis, Missouri. Where I can be contacted during working hours, blah, blah, blah. And this is some Detective Frank Meloch interview of this guy who got hit by Jada before the about a half an hour before the assassination. And she had mentioned to him that the Carousel Club would be closed that night. So does that indicate prior information? I mean, this is pretty specific information. You'd think police reports would could be found, about this accident and about this incident. And if it happened, who was the guy with Jada? And who was the guy in the Cadillac that came there within 2 minutes of it happening? Very weird. Very weird. Maybe she knew more than she let on. February 15th, 1968. Folks. Um, we've all heard the assertions of Lee Harvey Oswald, and you've heard some of them here tonight about him driving a vehicle, about him taking driving lessons from Ruth Payne, um, despite him not actually having a driver's license. Well, that just might not be the case, folks. According to Althea Fryer, and this is from Valentine's Day, 1968. Her statement to the district attorney of Orleans Parish, state of Louisiana. My name is Althea Fryer. I live at 8001 Benson, New Orleans, Louisiana. I worked for the Department of Public Safety in Austin, Texas, from the early part of October 63 through the early part of December 63. While I was employed at the Department of Public Safety, I worked in the License Records Department. This department was responsible for the IBM computer records of all drivers' licenses issued in the state of Texas. My husband John was working for the UPI, United Press International, during November of 63, and on November the 22nd, 63, he was in Uvalde, Texas, covering the birthday of ex-Vice President John Mance Garner. I did not go to work on the 22nd of November, but the following event occurred the week after the assassination of the president. During the week following the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald on either Wednesday the 27th or Thursday the 28th, the Texas driver's license issued to Lee Harvey Oswald came into my division. The record, an IBM card, with Oswald was pulled from the files. Several other employees, 5 or 6 of the department, saw the actual driver's license, which was dirty and worn as though it had been carried in a billfold. The license was the talk of the office that day since everyone knew who Oswald was, and the reason his driver's license records were being pulled from the active file was the fact that he had been killed. In October of 66, my husband and I moved to New Orleans, and in June of 67, my husband went to work for NWL TV Channel 4. I, Althea Fryer, hereby affirm that all of the above statement is true to the best of my knowledge. Signed in front of witness Gary Sanders and Jody Dusk by Althea Fryer. She states, I saw with my own eyes the pink Texas driver's license, about 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. The license had the name Lee Harvey Oswald printed on the card as the licensee. The license was stained with some sort of brownish discolor, something or another, liquid, who she believed could have been blood. Now, that's pretty fantastic, right? So, following up, this is from Gary Sanders, investigator in the DA's office, to Bill Boxley, another investigator, regarding Oswald's Texas driver's license 6 days later on February the 20th, 1968. States the existence of a Texas operator's license belonging to Lee Harvey Oswald has been established by Mrs. Althea Fryer, a former employee of the Texas Department of Public Safety. Mrs. Fryer also gave me the following names that might furnish some additional statements on the order of Mrs. Fryer's assertions. These people were present in the office and saw Lee Harvey Oswald's driver's license. Ray Sunday, still employed at DPS. Joyce Bostic of Austin, Texas. Inez Lake, still at DPS. Gail Scott, possible name of girl working in records department in November 63. Peggy Smith, possible name of girl working in records department in November 63. And Mrs. Ernie Isaacs, employed in the records department in 63. So this is a lot to follow up on, and I wonder if it ever was, folks. Such interesting stuff. I love it. I just wish we knew if some of this stuff was ever followed up on and what the results were. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. So if that's true, if Lee Harvey Oswald did have a Texas driver's license and it was deep sixed and covered up, what's the reason? I mean, does it really matter? I mean, whether he drove or not, whether or not he had a car, whose car was he driving? Why did they not want this out there? Does any of this make sense? I don't know. Did somebody obtain a license in his name? Because, back then there was no pictures on the license. You could just get a license. And if they had some false documents to say, hi, my name's Lee Harvey Oswald, blah, 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 anybody could have obtained a fake ID, so to say, as long as they somewhat matched the description and age range and everything that the license was depicting. So, interesting to think about for sure. Which brings us to our last one here from April the 23rd, 1968, from James Alcock and Louis Ivon to Jim Garrison concerning Connie Kay, who was a vocalist at Pat O'Brien's, I guess it was a supper club, was interviewed in our office on April 1968. The interview was conducted as a result of statements attributed to her in December the 14th, 63 issue of Saturday Evening Post magazine. Miss Kay told us she saw Oswald in Pat O'Brien's about 2 or 3 times. He would slip in the back and stand in a corner. He never purchased a drink. The time she saw him, he was wearing a white sports shirt open at the collar. The shirt was somewhat soiled, and he looked very haggard and emaciated. He looked to her like many of the French Quarter fags or male prostitutes. He never seemed to be with anyone, however. At the time, during her routine, Miss Kay would refer to Fidel Castro as that Bastro. After one performance in which she used this gag, she had a run-in with Oswald at the Bourbon House. He, without invitation, interrupted her conversation to castigate her for knocking Castro. From his looks, she deduced he was a character, in quotes, and did not engage him in any debate or conversation. As she recalls, this incident happened sometime in November of 63. Oswald was wearing his usual attire, slacks and a white sports shirt open at the collar, and he had what appeared to be a couple of days' facial hair growth. All told, Miss Kay saw Lee Oswald 2 or 3 times at Pat O'Brien's and 1 time at the Bourbon House. She is sure it was Oswald, but said that he looked thinner than his pictures indicate. And there's a note on top of this. Question marks. Thornley? Hard to say. But again, people that see these pictures of Oswald after, he's been killed on national television and after being accused as the murderer of the president, often start remembering things. And I think this is a lot of the problems that Jim Garrison was running into, is people that were remembering things, but maybe they weren't 100% accurate. A lot of these guys that were around back then at that time in that area looked very similar. It's not like today where everybody's an individual, man, and they have tattoos on their face and piercings and long hair or beards. Back then, most folks were clean cut, clean shaven, and dressed somewhat decently, you know. So the chances that, she may have run into Oswald, it certainly sounds like he would castigate her for um, talking shit about Fidel Castro, but who knows? Who knows about any of this stuff? We could throw it all in the trash can and be done with it. Or it would cause us to think a little further and dig a little further and see what else, we can start digging up. But anyway, folks, that's it for this time. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time. Peace.